point out the time of this webinar. We here at GLC Idea take improvements, performance improvement very seriously. And so we are continuously polling our members and people who use our services to see how we can do a better job. And in recent communications, we found out that folks wanted some evening webinars. So we thought, okay, this is a perfect one specifically for the board member who works another job, who might not be able to take out a time in the middle of their day to break away to listen to a webinar or something. So we decided to hold this. This is the first evening one we've had in quite some time. So I'm glad you can join us, and glad that this time works out for many people. So tonight we'll be discussing Board 101. Kind of our objectives tonight is to talk about and understand the legal duties of board members and the various roles that board members can play in an organization. So this is, boards are the life source, the kind of the core, really the engine that drives an organization. So without a healthy and active board, all the good works that nonprofits do will not really be able to come forth in a way that's effective or efficient, or not haphazardly. The board really gives that solid vision and mission to what a nonprofit's supposed to do to complete the work they're doing. So they are definitely the single most important body of a nonprofit. There's that legal and social responsibilities. The board is ultimately responsible for making sure there's enough resources to fulfill the mission that they have stated that they're trying to accomplish. So, and in the nonprofit board, you know, you're acting for the good of others. It's a selfless type service where the community is, you know, serving. The community gets served by the organization, and the boards, they're responsible to make sure that that is actually happening from the staff that they hire or the volunteers. But first of all, if you're a board member tonight listening in, you are to be commended, because we want to thank you for your serving on those boards. Without you, our nonprofits can't function correctly or healthy. So thank you for taking your free time and dedicating it to whatever mission, whatever organization that you believe in, but serving as a board member, which is, again, we've learned tonight, a definite responsibility that you take when you undertake that position. So, and I want to stress for a moment here, one important thing as we start, that a nonprofit board is an entity that acts as one to make legal and socially responsible decisions. So, and we'll get into this a little bit more this evening, but the idea that you as a board member are part of one unit. You act as one unit. It's not a bunch of board members making random decisions. So we want to get that kind of, make sure we drive that home, that the board is a unit and not just an individual. So all right. So again, we'll dig into this, and we'll start off with some of the legal duties that board members have to their organization. And the first is called the duty of care, what we call the duty of care. And the duty of care describes the level of competence that is expected of a board member. You know, it's like taking, if there was a regular person out there with some just regular prudence, and if they are faced with the same decisions, the same set of situations in that position and under similar circumstances, what would they do? What would they do? So it's very reasonable. You're exercising reasonable care when making a decision as a steward of the organization. So the duty of care is important, that you don't let things slide too much, that you're keeping on top of things, and that the average person, the normal, regular, responsible person would say, yeah, that makes sense. Those decisions make sense. It's not like, whoa, where are they going off on that one? Another part of duty of care is attending the meetings, actually showing up, and not just showing up and just sitting there, but actually understanding the workings of the organization you're serving and understanding the issues that affect it, and being engaged in the board meetings, and not just the meetings. Maybe your organization has committees, or subcommittees, or special events, or temporary things. You need to be engaged. It's not simply, or for most organizations, I should say, it's not simply showing up for your monthly meeting or your quarterly meeting and then that's it. There's more to it. There's more to being involved in being a member of a board and being engaged. So, and about this one about being engaged, I think I want to really share something I've been saying a lot more in conversations with boards I've been working with. There's unfortunately a habit that happens to boards, and I've heard some frustration from board chair people and directors of organizations that, again, board members come, they show up, or sometimes they don't even show up, but they're not engaged. There's no real action being happened. There's not really taking part in the decision making or in the work needed to help guide an organization. And that's a key part of what a board member does. It's not just simply being able to tell others, yeah, I serve on this board. You need to actually be giving to the board, like just working for it, doing your part. So one of my big mantras lately is either step up or step off. And that's kind of a little clever way to talk about when serving on a board. You either need to be engaged, you need to be actively involved, or that's not the right place for you. And maybe a different board or a different mission might be better suited for your gifts or your interests. So this duty of care is important. You need to be involved. You need to be present mentally, not just physically, when you're at your meetings. The next duty we'd like to talk about is the duty of loyalty. This is the standard of faithfulness that we have when you serve a board. So in other words, it's a board member giving their undivided allegiance to the organization when making decisions that affect that organization. Again, as a board member, you are not serving for your own personal gain. You're serving to put the interests of the organization before your own. So that usually is not a big deal if there's a but however, a lot of us are business people in the community. We own businesses that sell products or services, and if the organization is looking for someone to provide that, and all of a sudden, oh wait, I do that. One of the pieces of advice we give you is just to remove yourself from that situation. If the board is going to vote on something and they need, let's just say you own a sign shop and you're serving on that board, and they're looking to redo the sign for their organization's building, all you do is recuse yourself from that vote so that you cannot be deemed at all that there's a conflict of interest or that you're benefiting from it. And that doesn't mean the organization can't use your business, but you will not have voted for something that gives you some gain. I hope that makes sense. But it's a one you have to be very careful about, because you don't want the public perception to ever think you're giving favor to people on your board just because of their serving with or you're showing favors. So make sure when you're serving that, again, your whole reason for serving is the interests of the organization and nothing for yourself. And this is a tough one too. I know a lot of people who serve on multiple boards. So when there's conflicts or there's interactions between two organizations, or there's whatever, be really aware of what is your role. And if you cannot stand on one side or the other confidently, or if there's a conflict, just again, remove yourself so that you're not shown to show preference for one or the other. So this section of the duty of loyalty is also where most boards, and you really should have this if you don't have this, they sign a conflict of interest policy. So that means, again, that you won't be entering into any agreements that could be a potential conflict with your serving on that organization. So there's also the duty of obedience, which is a word we don't use a lot around here, but this is really sums it up, is that every decision you make as an organization, as a board, is to be faithful to the organization's mission. That's the whole reason why the organization exists, and the board should be working to fulfill that mission. So they must act in a way that's consistent with the central goals of the organization, because the public's trust in you as an organization it is dependent upon this, that you're acting in a lawful and reasonable way, and also one that fits with the reason why you exist. So the public trusts that when they donate funds or they give to a fundraiser or whatever, what have you, that they're trusting that you as the board and the staff are managing those finances in a way to fulfill the organization's missions. So this is where this obedience comes in. You don't want to have to go to the public and say, well, we spent that money doing this instead, and it really doesn't fit with what we're supposed to, why we exist and what we're supposed to do. That would give not only a huge public relations nightmare, but it would seriously erode trust that people have, especially if you're asking them to donate to your cause. So make sure, again, when you're making decisions at the board level, that you're doing it with a mission mindset, that these decisions are working to fulfill our mission. Other things to be aware of in the duty of obedience: understand your bylaws, understand IRS regulations and state laws that apply to your organization. Do you have to be an expert? No, but you need to be mindful of it. And make sure there are some people on your board who really do understand those on a deeper level, but everyone on the board should at least have some understanding of what the different regulations are that govern your board at the state, even the federal level, but especially in your bylaws, which will tell you how you're supposed to operate and why you exist, how you exist, etc. There is actually a fourth duty sometimes that people put in, is the duty of confidentiality. Some boards are required to have transparency or hold open meetings. So obviously that would be difficult to be confidential, but for confidential matters, they can always go into closed sessions. But this one really talks about too, that even if it's not a confidential or closed session, things that are pertinent to that board and to that organization that don't need to be shared in the community, just don't do it. It's not about withholding information. It's about things that are personal or just don't need to have public consumption and understanding, that just stay in the boardroom. But that, again, you're not hiding anything, but again, you don't need to blab every little thing and every little conflict that might happen in your organization. So keeping things close to the chest a little bit, so that doesn't bring a bad name, again, because you're looking to do the best for your organizations. You don't. So sometimes you will have to sign a confidentiality policy, but that kind of determines on a case-by-case basis for the organization. Okay, so those are your three main legal duties as a board member. Those are the ones that can get you in trouble if these aren't in place, if people on your board are not acting in accordance to these three duties of care, loyalty, and obedience. You really need to have a serious sit down. Chairperson, if that's your role, don't pass that off on your executive director or your CEO. That's not their job to bring board members back into line. That is actually the chairperson's or some other member of the executive committee. So make sure they're you're self-monitoring you as a group, that you stand and are staying legal with each other. And it's just simple reminders. Good thing to review at least on an annual basis, if not more, is to remind everyone what their responsibilities and duties are when it comes to keeping the organization and the board legal. Okay, so let's just switch gears a little bit and talk about the work of the board. And as you can see, right, I've picked out like 5 big main areas that talk about the main work of the board. So these are your main responsibilities. There could be more that we list, but these, I think, cover the very basic and the biggest issues that you need to worry about as a board. So we're going to go take each of these in depth. And as we do, think about your own board that you serve on, or that maybe you're a director, it's a board that you work with, and think about what areas are strengths for your board and what areas do you really need some improvement. And hopefully you'll get to see some of those as we come up here. First, we'll start off with board operations. This includes the makeup of your board, meaning who's on it. This includes recruiting of board members. And this is really important. I think some organizations fall into the trap of letting the staff, but especially the leader of the organization, the paid leader, whether it's a director or CEO or whatever you call your coordinator, they expect them to go and find board member replacements, but that is the wrong mode. The board should be the one that replaces itself. In other words, doing that recruitment aspect and going and finding board members when more are needed. So yeah, I've seen that far too often when that's left on the executive director's shoulders to go and find or recommend or nominate new board members, but that's not how it's supposed to go. The board, if you don't have a committee, board development committee or nominating committee or board recruitment committee, something like that, that's something you might want to consider. Because again, if you have terms on your board and just regular turnover that happens in a life of an organization, you always need to be on the lookout for potential board members and grooming people to take steps within the board into further leadership, whether it's executive committee roles like the secretary, treasurer, vice chair, and chairperson. So that kind of stuff, that is the board's responsibility to keep that, maintain that structure, to recruit and fill those spots. So if you haven't been doing that and you've been relying on the director, stop it. Stop it. It's time for you to step up and help. All right. So really the board, again, that's I mentioned here, there's orientation, training, and assessment. This is all about your board structure. Again, you orientate. That's another thing I've seen too many times. Directors trying to, not board of directors, but I'm sorry, executive directors and CEOs doing the orientation for a new board member. No, that's again not how it's supposed to work. The board of directors or board members should have an orientation plan and a training schedule to train in and orientate new board members. This again is a function of the board kind of assessing and supervising itself and not having staff involved in that. So again, board directors, step up. You guys got this, but you need to train your own, teach your own, assess yourselves, and determine your structure and your officers and stuff. Okay, that's enough. I'm going to stop being so heavy-handed here. Strategic planning. Yes, I know that's a terrible 2 words that some people just start crying about, like, oh, no, we don't want to do strategic planning. But we're not talking about the strategic planning retreat or process. We're talking about just the act of thinking strategically from a higher level and planning out the future of the organization. This should be happening on an ongoing basis. This is not something that happens just at a once every 5-year retreat or because you hire a consultant or a facilitator to do this planning. This is an ongoing process. The board thinks at a higher level than the staff. The staff are worried about day-to-day accomplishment of the mission. The board is looking at a higher level, kind of bird's eye view about where are we going as the organization? Are we staying on mission? So that's your focus as a board. Thinking and planning for the future, looking at the big picture. The board should be partnering with the executive director or CEO for driving forward the organization, but not the executive director or CEO telling the board what direction the organization is going. I guarantee there's some people listening in that has been the case, where you have a strong leader, a good leader, running your organization as your executive director or CEO, but they go to the board meetings and tell the board where the organization's going. That's backwards. The executive director and CEO should be taking marching orders from the strategic thinking and planning that the board does. The board sets the course. And then the leadership, whether it's the executive director or CEO, they're the ones who then take that boat and sail it. But the one who determines the destination and where we're going, that's the board. So you need to be thinking strategically in all of your board meetings, not worried about day-to-day. Yes, you can have oversight over day-to-day, and make sure things are going smooth. But really your ultimate concern is the big picture. All right, resource development. If you already didn't dislike what I said and all the work I put on your plate as a board member, you're going to like me even less. Because the ultimate responsibility of resource development for an organization falls on the shoulders and responsibility of the board of directors. That includes financial resources, the human resources, and the physical resources. What do these mean? So yes, those of you who sit on a board and said, yeah, but I don't want to be involved in fundraising. Wrong answer. In some capacity, in some way, your plan needs to include how are we going to keep this organization financially stable going forward so we can continue to do our mission. All right, so you're responsible for making sure the resources are there to continue the mission. That includes the financial. So yes, you might hire someone on staff to do development or to write grants, or maybe you have someone who's involved with special event fundraisers, all that stuff. And those are good things. That's delegating to a paid staff position. But in smaller organizations, which 75 to 80, 90% of you listening are probably involved in, you don't have those positions. So it's not just your paid director, your paid leader job to drum up the funds. It's the board's responsibility to make sure that when they approve a budget, that they are part of the process to help make sure that budget is obtained. So yes, you do have a financial responsibility. Equally important, but because everyone thinks that big money stuff is the scariest, is the human resource. In other words, the board hires the leader of the organization, whether you call that an executive director or a CEO or a coordinator or whatever the title is, they hire that person. That hire is vital. As you know, you've probably seen it, you've maybe been gone through it yourself. Who you choose to run and lead that organization could be the difference between success and failure. So the board has to take that responsibility very seriously, because then out of that executive director hire, that person's responsible for building a staff. If you're a new startup, hiring people to do the work, or supervising your existing staff and leading them to fulfill your mission. So once the board hires their leader, that leader then is charged with the responsibility to carry out the mission per the board's direction. So board members, if you spend a lot of time fielding tons of questions and getting into the squabbles of staff members, that really should be a redirect to say, let's talk to your ED or your CEO first, because that's the line to solve problems. The ED runs the organization on a day-to-day basis to fulfill the mission. The board hires that ED and equips them to do the work that needs to be done. The physical part of the resources is like if you've invested in things like a building or other assets that the organization might have or use, that again, a building that's failed to have maintenance done, the board needs to be making sure that that stuff is held and taken care of and maintained, or that the staff or whoever else is hired to do those maintenance is actually doing it, so that that resource is not prematurely depleted or suffers loss or etc. So again, the board is a huge partner with the staff and with the CEO or executive director for developing these resources. It's not about just passing the buck. So there's my little speech on that one. I'm everyone's favorite person tonight, I bet. Oversight. This is going back to what I just got done saying a little bit. This is the organization chart of an organization. Looks like this. It's the board at the top, the executive director or CEO next, and then the staff and or volunteers if you have them. So the board's responsible for hiring and evaluating the executive director. The executive director is responsible usually for hiring and then also supervising and assessing and evaluating the staff or volunteers. So boards don't get into the problem. You have oversight, but you're not called to micromanage. All right. So you can't really do micromanaging and provide effective oversight at the same time. So again, you're looking at the big picture. You're making sure the financial stability exists, that the financial resources exist. You're looking at if the programming and the mission is being successful. In other words, if you have a program you're trying to do to fulfill your mission, it's your job as an oversight to say, is not to nitpick how the program's run, but to sit back and go, okay, are the results that the program is supposed to do, did they happen? That's your oversight. So, and the executive director will report then and say, well, here's how the program's going, here's who we've served, here's its effectiveness, all that stuff. And then you can, as a board, can say, you know what, have that conversation with the director to say, is that being as effective, or is that fulfilling our mission? That's where your oversight comes in, but it's not micromanaging. And again, really being careful, you are really the gatekeeper for legal, keeping that organization legal and making sure that it's operating in a legal way. So there's your oversight. Again, think of the big picture. You're flying up in as a bird or the plane, overseeing everything rather than being on the ground accomplishing the mission. So, but the board plays that vital role in making sure that things don't go so awry or get out of control. And unfortunately, that can happen, especially with a strong leader who kind of just takes the bull by the horns and just runs with it. And that's when a board really needs to be conscious and be diligent in their oversight. And the last one, it's really important, is being an ambassador for your organization. This might seem like a simple thing, but I would argue that a lot of executive directors and CEOs are frustrated that they don't feel like their board does this as well as they would like. And what this means is you're advocating for the organization, for its mission, that you are talking it up in the public. We all have different spheres of influence and social circles. And so if you are passionate about the mission of the organization that you're serving as a board member, it's going to be your director and leaders' hope that you will talk it up, that you'll let people know what's going on, that you will be a champion and be a voice in the community for the great work that your organization is doing. Those opportunities not only share the good things that's going on in your organization, but it leads to, when people know what your organization's up to, it leads for more public support, which of course includes potential donors or maybe even people volunteering, the different resources you need to actually run your organization. So the directors, your executive directors and CEOs really are looking to you to step up and stand up and be a voice in the communities, in your communities, about what your organization is doing. This is also a great area that when you maybe term off the board or decide your time is done on the board, this is a great opportunity for former board members to stay active with the organization or continue to give to the organization, not just financially, but by continuing to talking about their time of serving the organization, continue to talk about the mission and the things the organization is accomplishing. So if you're looking to term off as a board, or you know of some people who just left your board, keep them in the know, keep them actively involved by asking them to be a voice in the community and to their groups on behalf of your organization, because they can still be an ambassador in the community for your organization. And sometimes they can do some great things and open some great doors, even if they're not currently on the board. So look for those opportunities to be ambassadors. So let's see, a definition of what a good board member is. So now you can kind of, I'll go through all these and you can say, assess yourself and assess maybe your fellow board members of the board you're serving is saying, do we measure up? So again, you attend and actively participate in meetings and special events. I serve on a local board here, actually just in the Ishpeming area. And one of the things I've just marveled at in my just about a year that I've served on it is that when we have events, we have an extremely high turnout rate for board members showing up at events. It's like one of the things I'm most proud of. It's like you go and 80, 90, sometimes 100% of our board is actually at the event. And that's just great. I mean, what is that message that convey to the community, that we as the board believe so much in what we're doing that we're all here? So show up to things. Yeah, you may not be able to, depending on how active your organization is, get to everything, and that's okay. But when you can be, go there, show up, show support. But the meeting one's even more important. It really is more important. If again, to show up, to be actively involved, to be active in the discussion and decision making that happens in the boardroom. So they need your voice. If you're just one of the many that makes that one unit of the board, it needs all its different parts participating, talking, listening, giving advice to function in its best capacity. So yeah, so some organizations, if they're worried about this part about attending meetings, have attendance policies in their bylaws. But it's something that definitely should be covered in your orientation when new members come on, so they know the expectation of how much they're supposed to be there. And really that's the chairperson, that's another one of their oversight, their kind of oversight and kind of policing their own board, is to keep track of who's there, who's not there, the reasons why, that kind of stuff. And it's not to be nitpicky, it's just to keep people accountable for their responsibilities. So coming prepared to meetings, that means two things. Whoever is putting together the agenda, typically a chairperson with the help of an executive director, that is getting out ahead of time, well ahead of time, that the board members can actually read the minutes from the previous meeting, look at the agenda for the upcoming meeting, so that they can approve that agenda and move forward smoothly with the meeting. Not doing what I've seen in some meetings where people are reading last month's minutes, or we're trying to vote on the agenda being approved and some people are keep on throwing out more and more ideas of what could be added, which that stuff should have been done ahead of time. I mean, so again, come prepared for your board meetings, be prepared in general. Thinking strategically and generatively is the idea that, again, you're taking this bird's eye view of the organization, thinking long term, and you're generating ideas on how to keep this mission moving forward. Be confident in yourself. You have a responsibility. You are no less powerful. You are no less important than any other member of your board. Because again, individuals don't matter on a board. It's the unit, the unity and the unit of the board. Therefore, this next point, if there are legal or ethical concerns that come up in your organization, speak up. Speak up. We have seen it too often where things feel or look fishy and people have not said anything until boom, it's too late and things have just fallen out of control. So if you're concerned, if you're not sure, speak up. The worst that can happen is someone to say, no, you don't understand it, and they explain it to you. Great, now you know. But if you don't speak up and you come find out later on down the road that there was a concern or there was something that the organization was not doing correctly, there might be a lot more damage done. So do not be afraid to speak up. Use your voice. That's why you're there. I just mentioned about ambassadors. I think the next one's kind of an interesting one. People don't always get, is that make a financial contribution once a year to the nonprofit that you serve on their board. If nothing else, it gives the director a great line to use when talking to potential donors or supporters. And that is this simple line: 100% of my board gives to our organization. Nothing has been said about amount, frequency. It just says that on an annual basis, they can tell people that my board believes so much in what we're doing, they're giving financially to this organization. A case in point of why the dollar amounts really don't matter. And maybe that's something you work out with your certain board members where there's an expectation like, hey, yes, I want to come on board because I want to be able to financially give at this kind of rate. And that's fine. But we at GLCYD have youth that serve, teenagers that serve on our board as part of our really a core value of believing in youth. And we ask those same young people to give a financial contribution once a year. Now, wait a second, how much can kids give, right? Well, it doesn't matter how much they give. It's the fact they step up and actually give. So that our CEO can tell people, yeah, we have our board 100% behind us by giving financially to our organization. So if you don't do that currently, seriously consider doing it. I actually know of some organizations that's part of their bylaws, that their board is expected to make a donation. Again, rarely ever is it stated an amount, but at least to give to the organization. And the last one, yes, here's the grumbles. I can hear the grumbles through through this system here is that you really do need to help finding and actually doing the soliciting of new donors. That is a part of the board's responsibility. You're supposed to help your executive director or CEO locate those people who are like-minded, who'd want to give to your mission. So yeah, it is looking at your contacts and finding out who would be a potential person who would give to this mission and give to this work that we're doing. So yes, I know it's not always comfortable and people don't like asking others for money, but that is one of the jobs of the board, is to make sure that they're helping the staff in the raising of funds and finding new people to be involved. So one of the things to think about it too is when you're making decisions at the board level too, this is why we talked about a couple different times of seeing things strategically, speaking up, is that you don't ever want to fall into the trap of become rubber stamping. And you may have been on a board like this where you just come to the meetings, the director, executive director kind of reports on things, everyone goes, yep, sounds good, boom, 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 done, we're done. That's great. No one asks questions, no one pushes back. There's no discussion about things. It's just like, yep, things are going great, we don't need to worry about anything. That's a dangerous precedence to set at a board level when there's rubber stamping being done, because things get missed. And it's kind of a dangerous place to get at when you're from an oversight as a board. So be careful not to fall into that trap of just saying, hey, everything's going great, it was bowl through this meeting, get done with it. So, okay, so now you know what a good board member looks like. So now we're going to talk about little three hats of different roles that the board has and how they kind of factor into how you operate. The first hat you wear is the governance hat. This is your most formal hat. This is where you walk into your board meeting and now you have responsibility and governance of this organization. However, as it says in my little slide there, it's only when you have a quorum, because otherwise, if you don't have a quorum, whatever your quorum is set up for your meetings, you're not that unit. You have failed to make the necessary numbers to be that acting governance unit. So you make your quorum. So your board is the ultimate legal and moral authority for your organization. You are the buck that stops there. Everyone looks to the executive director and CEO as the ultimate authority in an organization, but that's not true. You as the board are the ultimate responsibility, the ultimate authority in your organization. So don't forget that. You have power. With that power, with great power comes great responsibility. That's a nod to any comic book nerds out there. Okay, the second hat you wear is implementation. All right, this is where you are delegated, you are given specific authority over a specific or a very selected area. This is where the implementation is, where your task force and your committees come into play. All right, you assign certain board members, or they sign up to serve on certain committees. Now these committees do some of the actual work. They're actually doing things. So there might be a fundraising committee that is helping raise funds. There might be a governance that's helping you with the governance. There could be a nominating that helps with getting new board members. There's a bunch of different, there could be a public relations or a marketing committee. So these are, what this is the board then in this implementation phase is giving those members, those committees and task force, a specific set of instructions and area of influence and decision making. And then those committees and task force report back to the board as a whole. So those committees and task force will actually have some board members who then have a limited power to accomplish the task that was given and delegated to them. So that's where you're implementing your vision. And the last little hat you wear is actually the biggest one, because you wear it most often, is when you volunteer. You show up at the annual dinner and you are helping seat people and making sure everyone's in the right spot, or you're at a business after hours and you're shaking hands and telling people, hi, I'm a board member for such and such organization or whatever. The key to remember when you're volunteering or acting as a volunteer by yourself, you have no actual authority on the organizational level. The only authority you have is very limited when you're in community committees and task force in the implementation hat, but it's specifically when you're at the board table in the governance field. But when you're in the volunteer, you might have a title, but you actually have no individual authority when it comes to the organization. You're a board member. I'm a board member of a couple different boards, but right now, sitting here doing this webinar, I have zero power when it comes to those boards. I only have power when we're meeting collectively as a unit to make decisions on behalf of that organization. So remember that. So in other words, don't go throwing your weight around when you're at an event to your executive director or CEO, because that is the wrong time because you actually have no authority. So remember that. But the bulk of your time will actually be spent acting as a volunteer, doing stuff on behalf of the organization. This grid, we love this grid. This is a really nice little graphic here. It talks about the divisions of responsibilities, which is often misunderstood. I want to start off with actually the bottom of this. The basis of this whole relationship between board and CEO and executive director has to have the foundation of trust. Without a trust between those two entities, none of this work can work well or successfully. So there has to be a basis in trust. And again, if the board doesn't trust their ED or CEO, then why are they still working there? But honestly, if that's a concern in your organization, that's a question the board needs to have. But anyway, let's talk about the differences between the board's looking at end results, making sure the mission is happening, but the CEO ED is looking at, okay, but like, where's the means? How are we going to get there? The questions the board asks are the what, why, how much, how well. The leader's asking how, when, where, by whom. Do you see the difference? One's upper looking level, the other one's more specific at kind of the arm doing it. The board's concerned with missions and goals, the big stuff. The CEO is looking at procedures and assignments and who's going to do what and where are they going to go and all that stuff. So there's the difference. The board's method of making responsible decisions is voting. The director and CEO is simply making recommendations to the board. So that's how that's split up. That kind of works. Hopefully you'll have access to this afterwards. Hopefully this graph will help. So some tips, tricks, and ideas. Like, say that 12 times fast. Okay. Having effective orientations will help your board function better. When people coming in know exactly what they're supposed to be doing. Type your mission at the top of your agendas to make that the forefront of your mind in decision making, so that this is why we exist. A mission moment on the agenda is an opportunity for a board member to share a story of something that's happened in the organization that they're really proud of, or maybe it's in a volunteer aspect that that you want to share with everyone. It's a feel good. It's the stories that make up why we do what we do. Shows the results. You can conduct meeting evaluations to make sure you're being succinct and effective and efficient. And you can also just share with this webinar will be recorded, so you can share this training with them and look for areas that you as a group can improve. All right, that was a lot in a short amount of time. Some things we do at GLC Idea that can help you in your board. We can help evaluate your meetings. We can help you, give you tools for self-evaluations. We can help you develop orientations. We can help you recruit or come up with a tracking grid that will help you figure out who to recruit for your boards. And we do a lot of strategic planning as well for organizations as facilitating that process. So if that's anything you need, reach out to us. So now, Victoria, I'll welcome you back since I've been babbling for 45 minutes. Does anyone have any questions here? We have a few minutes at the end that we can talk about those.
Yes, we have actually right now about 5 questions. If you have a question, please type it in the question box and I will just start at the top and we'll work our way through. So the first question I'll actually answer. The question is, will handouts be available after the webinar? And the answer is yes. I will send out a PDF of the presentation along with a link to the YouTube recording tomorrow morning. So check your email in the morning and you'll get all of that information. The next question, this one's for you, Chad. All right. The question is, in my nonprofit, I have an advisory council. Would you consider the guidelines for being a good board member the same? In my mind, they function the same way that I do on boards that I sit on.
I would assume so, not knowing exactly what that advisory committee looks like or if there's a rules or bylaws, but it sounds like it's a very similar to what a board would be. So I think all these principles, most of them would definitely apply. So if you have some of those advisory committee members, it sounds like they're advising the leader of that organization to fulfill the mission. It sounds very similar to what a board might be without more specifics, so it's hard to tell. So if that person wants to get a hold of us right now, currently on the screens my email, so email me. And if you want to get into it more deeper, I'd be happy to do so.
Awesome. The next question, can the purchase of event tickets be considered the financial contribution of a board member?
That's a great question. Well, if it's event ticket and usually what happens is an event ticket's part of the cost of the ticket is going towards whether it be your the expenses for the event, but usually there's built in with an event ticket a portion that's actually a donation. That hopefully it makes sense. So like, let's just say that the event ticket's $50 and 25 of that is actually earmarked for the expenses for the event, whether it's a dinner or whatever. But the other 25 is actually a charitable contribution. So your organization should be aware of that split and understand. But then obviously, if that part of that is a charitable contribution, then yes, you're giving to your organization. And that's also one of those ways that if you're holding the event, you want to, as a board member, you want to be there anyway. So yeah, you're giving to your organization through that, but also you want to be present just to show your face and show your support. My biggest suggestion, I guess, with this would be is that's a discussion to have with your board chair. Does something like that are they, as a board, are you including that as yes, I'm doing that obligation, or are they going to say no, that's separate, and we'd rather you actually give a contribution that's outside of events? That's, you as a board can decide that. That's the great thing. You're governing yourselves, and so your board chair or executive team can tell you what kind of qualifies as your giving an annual gift.
All right, next question. How often should a quality board meet?
That is so hard. I'm not laughing at the question. I'm laughing at the answer could be 1,000-fold. It really depends on what? How often do you need to meet to effectively govern your organization? So that's a non-answer answer, I understand. But what I'm saying is some organizations, because of their activities, they can get together once a quarter, and that's fine. They can still do their work, they can still have their committees meet, and they can still give advice and guidance to the executive director or CEO by only meeting that few times. All right. Other organizations, it might be a monthly thing. And I have served on organizations and on boards that do both. So it's really specific to the organization. How much input, how much guidance does that leadership team need from its board? And that'll determine how often you meet. But it's a commitment from the board. The board has to then, once they make that up, they have to show up and be present. So there is no golden rule. Let's put it that way. And it's a long answer to something that we're short, but there is no golden rule. But you have, as a board, have to determine, with talking with your executive director and CEO, what's the best times and how many times to meet that we can really fulfill this mission and give the guidance needed for that executive director to fulfill it. So sorry, that wasn't a really concise or complete answer, but it really does vary from organization to organization.
Awesome. Next up, we have, is it good practice to have the employees of the organization meet board members? And if so, how often should they interact with the board?
Now, this is interesting because this is now going to be based upon, and I'm being honest, opinion. This is, I want to make sure that's absolutely clear. This is an opinion. It's my opinion from work, being an employee of nonprofits, being the director of a nonprofit, and serving on a board. There are some organizations, let's put it this way, it gives me a concern and a red flag if an executive director or CEO tells the staff you shouldn't have any interaction and should never know the board. That's a concern, because I'd love to hear the reason why that shouldn't be. The only thing that makes me sound like my gut instinct as a consultant to boards is, what are you trying to hide? There should be no reason why your staff cannot know your board. You're all in this together to fulfill your mission. Here at GLCYD, I know every single one of our board members that run our organization. I know them all. I've met them, whether it's coming through committees and serving on task force. And we as an organization get together at least once a year, the board and staff together, to show this kind of solidarity and make sure everyone knows everyone and what's everyone doing. So, and we're not the model. I'm not saying we're perfect, but I just, I would be very, I would question a lot why a leader would not want the staff to know the board. Then that does not give the staff the ability to run to the board and nitpicky and bother them on issues that they should not have their hands in whatsoever. But again, having complete, like, forbidding people to go to the board or know the board, that doesn't pass the smell test. So how often? I guess it really depends. Size of your organization is going to be a big part of that. We are lucky here to have a pretty smaller size organization, so it's not daunting to get to know, for the board to know the staff, but it might be if there were 30, 40, 50 people on staff. I don't know. But again, I think it's important for the staff to know who their leaders are, to know that you board members are real people, that you're not scary people, and that you're all working towards the greater good of your organization and your mission. So I do personally, again, that whole thing was opinion. I see no problem with staff knowing board members and interacting with them. Because again, staff members can tell stories to board members and how the great things are happening. That gives those board members more ammunition, if per se, to be able to tell others in the community, to be a more effective ambassador. So taking them out of the equation, not letting them interact with staff, you miss some of those stories, you miss some of that enthusiasm. So my encouragement is, get them together and just let your staff know that these great people that we should be proud of are serving and volunteering in our organization. They should be applauded and commended, and know that they have our best interests as an organization in mind. So that's just my opinion.
Awesome. Remember when I told you we only had 4 questions? Well, we've had
Yeah.
five more come in.
Why?
So we only have 5 minutes left. I understand if people have to start taking off, but Chad, if it's okay, I'm just going to keep asking questions.
Keep on keeping on.
Alrighty. Do you have any recommendations for resources that would help boards develop and maintain strong financial strategies and accountability?
Yeah, I did not prepare a list of that kind of resources. I'm sure we can here at GLCYD find you some resources like that. And I'm gonna, hey Victoria, I'm gonna use one of your simple phrases you give to us and the staff here all the time. You know what it is? You know what I'm gonna say, right?
I think I do.
Google it. I wish I had some recommendations to give you right off the top of my head, but I didn't. And next time I actually do this webinar, I'm going to make sure I have those with us, be armed with those. But no, you can search for these type of things. There's so much good information, even though I just the other day, Victoria and I were trying to find good resources for strategic planning and had a very difficult time finding good resources. So, again, if that person wants to reach out to us, my email's on the screen. We'll do some digging and find, and actually then I can clarify exactly the type of resource they really want. So just reach out to us. We're here to help.
And I can actually see who asked all of the questions, so I have the information here, and we can follow up via email tomorrow,
Awesome.
if that works. Awesome.
Great.
Next question. Can the executive director hold multiple titles? For example, one that wears the hat of something like volunteer leader to have more weight at an event?
Okay, I'm slow. It's almost 7. Read that again.
All
I'm
right.
trying to understand that question.
Can the executive director hold multiple titles? For example, one that wears the hat of something like volunteer leader to have more weight at an event.
Okay, well, see, I'm trying to understand the question and the idea that so at the event they have the title of volunteer leader, so that holds more weight. But in my mind, there is no more weight than the executive director. That's the leader of your organization. So the event shouldn't matter. That person has, even if you have delegated another person to the organization that runs typically volunteer events or whatever, that the executive director is still the ultimate authority for that event because they're the boss. So but yeah, the role that an executive director or CEO plays, they put on a bunch of hats. They wear, in fact, at times in an organization, they wear every hat, including janitor. And I'm not being sarcastic, I'm being serious. They play so many different roles they have to do just to make sure the work is getting done. So yeah, you wear different hats. If titles are a big deal, it's going to help motivate people. A change of title, then I guess you do what you got to do. But the ultimate authority is that CEO and executive director. So that's all the weight you should need for making decisions at an event, I hope. But again, if I misunderstood, please redirect us and let us know.
All right, next up. When getting the word out for the organization, should the responsibility be of the paid program coordinator, or may the board members do it as well? An example would be speaking to organizations about your nonprofit.
Okay. This is an interesting one. First of all, you want your board members to be those ambassadors out there speaking. However, I would say the wisest thing to do is if you're going to be going out there, especially in a formal, if you're talking informally, board members talk up your organization. But if you're talking about making formal presentations on behalf of the organizations, definitely be talking to your director, executive director, and make sure they're in the loop on what you're doing. Because the last thing they want to find out is secondhand that a bunch of board members are going off and making presentations and they had no ability to be there to be answering questions, or maybe it was a duplication, or to be honest, to be there as a safeguard for the information, because board members always know hopefully a lot, but they don't know everything. And the executive director of an organization knows the most usually. So if the presentation's happening and there's something that's said that's a little bit off or not quite right, the executive director, if they're given the opportunity to be present, can make a correction or follow up. And if they can't go, at least they are aware of the different organizations and groups that are being spoken to. So this is a communication thing. The board and the executive director need to be communicating consistently on any kind of presentations to the community. Yeah, so those are coordinated events. Hopefully that makes, Vic, am I making sense of that answer to you?
Yeah, I think that
Okay.
sounds great. One of the things that I've seen work well is what Chad mentioned, having a staff member and a board member do the presentation together.
There you go.
And it may not even be the program manager. It could be, if you're talking about a specific program, the direct on the ground staff that know the program inside and out. So when those specific questions do come up, they're able to give the answer instead of the board member saying, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to go back and find out specifically what that is. So I'm all about the team approach and having staff and board do it together.
Excellent. Thank you. That is a great, thank you for stepping up. I appreciate that.
No
What else do we
problem.
got?
All right. For a small nonprofit with less than a $150,000 budget, what would be the ideal size for a board? Is there a number that is too few or too many?
Yeah, there is one that's too few. There's something, I wish I knew off the top of my head. There's a certain number you have to have. I don't remember how much it is though. See, this is good when people catch you in something you should have read up on. But even with that size of a budget, I know that doesn't sound huge to people. I don't think, again, this is a recommendation. I think you'd at least want to have 7 to 10. The average board that we see around here runs about 10 to 12 people. 15 is getting up on the high side. There are some organizations that go way beyond that, which is crazy. But less than, I don't even know if you can do less than 3 or 4. No, in fact, you can't, because you have to have officers. So that's 4 positions. So that, I think that must be the bottom line that you have to have, but you wouldn't want to just have 4.
I'm going to jump in here, Chad.
Yes,
In Michigan, to start a nonprofit, to do the
yes.
incorporation paperwork, it's 2. But
Oh,
if you register with the IRS, do your 1023, and get that 501c3 status, it's 3,
okay. So at least 3.
at least 3.
But then again, that's keeping you legal. I would not suggest trying to run an organization with 3 board members. I would not recommend that. At least double that would probably be best. Because again, they're giving oversight, but they're also then, whether it's through committee or hands-on volunteering, they're helping your organization in much more ways. So 2 or 3 is not much help or oversight. So anyway, there you go. Any more, Victoria?
Yes.
Okay.
All right. It says, I am working to form a new ministry and board. I'm
Mhm.
thinking about starting as chair of the board of directors, and when we get larger and have funds raised, I'd like to become the ED. Would it be the best to step down at this time or to still serve in both roles?
Okay. Um, I do know that there are some organizations where the person serves in both capacities, but that's tricky. Um, my if now this looks like they're looking to start it. If they're looking to start it, you can serve on the board and help get that thing off the ground, because that's the most vital part. But when it comes time to hire that director, that would be the moment, if you were wanting to serve in that capacity, to, I would say, resign from the board and then put your hat in the ring to be the paid staff, the executive director, because then you're removing yourself from one level of responsibility to take up another. That would be what I would suggest is the best way to go about it. But if you're still in the fledglings, like beginning, starting phases, then there's no paid staff. You just need to get this off the ground. So stay as involved as you need to be to make sure this works and happens. And that means, serving in that chairperson capacity.
Awesome. That was the last question.
All right.
So that was fun. That's like the most questions we've ever gotten. So thank you guys for being such a great, attentive audience and for asking so many questions.
Thank you everyone for joining us in this first experiment. It's great to see how many people are even still here, even though we went 5 or 10 minutes over, or 5 minutes over. So thank you very much, and look forward to these information from Victoria tomorrow, and look forward to other opportunities for listening in on other webinars, topics coming up in the next few months. Thank you everyone, and have a good evening.
Bye.